Well everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Blackberry Classic and see how this specific phone holds up in 2023. Now, I don't really think anybody's going to be buying this specific phone anymore, but it's very interesting because a lot of people still look at the Blackberry phone lineup and they actually might consider buying this phone as some sort of like backup device or maybe as a whatever phone. I'm not even too sure. Honestly, you probably shouldn't be buying this phone anymore, but if you want to buy some phones, I would recommend buying. Links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the Blackberry Classic, this phone came out in 2014. So I have to kind of state that because this phone definitely is a little bit of a different design than a lot of phones that would originally have came out in 2014. You have to keep in mind that phones like the iPhone 6 came out this year. So this phone already kind of looked a little bit it didn't look outdated. It was trying to look like a Blackberry Classic, like a classic Blackberry. That's exactly what they were going for. Now on the front of this phone, the display, it was a 3.5-inch IPS LCD panel. It was a 720p panel. So it really wasn't even that bad. Like I thought it was like a pretty decent panel at that time. It was IPS. Not a lot of phone manufacturers were going the AMOLED route or OLED route. Apple still hadn't have touched it in this specific point yet. But I still think this specific phone's display was not that bad. But I will tell you the interesting design was with the keyboard and the capacitive keys. So with a phone like the Blackberry Classic, you have to keep in mind that this phone was pretty much going for that, classic Blackberry look. So it wasn't really trying to have like the least amount of bezel or anything. It embraced the original design. And I think that's why a lot of people ended up probably buying this phone or, a lot for a Blackberry at that moment. And I think that in and of itself is actually pretty cool. Now we have the center little like scroll wheel thing as well, which is kind of nice. You had the capacitive keys next to it as well. And that was kind of it. That's all we kind of had on this phone. I think it looked cool. I think it was pretty nice. But again, the novelty may have worn out a little bit faster. And now the Blackberry company isn't really even making phones anymore as far as we know. So that's another very interesting thing here. On the bottom you had the charging port, and on the back you had the standard back on this thing with its camera. It was a cool design. It's always nice seeing like old manufacturers embrace their older designs. So I think that was a pretty cool thing. But like I mentioned, when you're getting a phone like the Blackberry Classic as of this day, there's a lot of reasons to avoid a phone like this if I'm being honest. So in terms of the outside, that kind of covers it up there. Now in the camera setup, like I mentioned, you were getting a single camera setup on the back of this phone, but you were also getting a single camera setup on the front of this phone too. So I could have totally seen BlackBerry like remove the front camera or something like that. I'm not too sure. Maybe they would have never done it, but it was just something in the back of my head. I'm glad they kept the camera on the front and the back on this phone, which was awesome. Now it was a single 8-megapixel camera. So the first thing I would probably let you know about that is that this type of camera really isn't that great anymore. I mean, even probably in 2014 when this phone came out, it probably wasn't even that great of a camera as of that moment. So I just kind of want to get that out of the way. But with a phone like this, I mean, I'm sure at that moment it was still good enough for a lot of people out there. I'm sure a lot of people weren't buying this camera or buying this phone because of the camera, but because it had a camera, I think that ended up, being a little bit better here. So that in and of itself is kind of nice. Now on top of that, you still have, the capability of filming on your front camera as well. So I think that's honestly pretty cool too. So you have a bit of capability, you have you have a bit of, you have basically overall what I'm trying to say is this camera, I'm sure at that moment was okay, but it's probably not that good of a camera anymore. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of the software and the longevity portion of this device, I mean, this one's kind of an easy one. This device is pretty much, it's been outdated with software for a long period of time. So it stopped at BlackBerry OS 10.3.2, and that's a long way of saying that this phone is pretty much not worth buying anymore. I mean, when you have a phone that's been outdated for years and years and years, that just makes it a horrible deal in my opinion. And I remember even using this phone 3 years ago. I didn't use that as my main phone, just kind of as like a testing for these videos. And I was saying to myself that, wow, BlackBerry OS, like it really is almost exactly like what BlackBerry, the original system software used to be. And I thought that was really cool. And it was a cool throwback to see what, BlackBerry was able to do at that moment. But again, when you have a phone like this BlackBerry and it's already outdated with software, well, not only is the software fairly outdated, but the hardware is outdated as well. Now, they don't always go hand in hand. With a phone like a Galaxy S8, for example, that phone came out in 2017, 3 years after this phone, but that hardware doesn't really feel outdated. Like, it definitely feels like an older phone, but it doesn't feel that old. Same thing with the Galaxy S7, you could say. Maybe even like a Galaxy S6 and iPhone 6, those types of phones don't really feel that outdated compared to this type of device. And because, like, I think it was the Galaxy S5 S5 that came out the year that this phone came out, those types of, even the Galaxy S5 doesn't feel as outdated as this phone, which is kind of interesting. So to kind of sum up the software longevity portion, this phone clearly is not the latest phone anymore, and that's probably a big reason why I wouldn't recommend buying this phone anymore, is because it is pretty outdated with software. Now moving on to the performance, this device inside had that Qualcomm Snapdragon S4 Plus chipset with 2 GB of RAM. Now that's honestly not that bad of amount of RAM to have on this type of device. I mean, when you kind of consider it, this was, like I said, an older phone. So for it to have 2 GB of RAM in 2014 was nice. We didn't get 2 gigs of RAM on an iPhone until the year after this. So I think that in and of itself is pretty cool that we still had that type of capability. Now, I will tell you the performance of this phone is very, very interesting. So of course, if you're trying to get a phone of that year, Qualcomm chipsets are always very good. They've just notoriously been pretty decent. But in this day and age, this chipset is pretty outdated. I mean, it's a fairly old phone, so that's expected. It's pretty much nothing out of the ordinary. So when you get a phone like a Blackberry Classic, this is going to be an older type of device. It's going to have that older styling. And that's totally what's expected. So with a phone like this, I mean, if you're trying to let's say this phone was still software supported. If you're trying to just make phone calls, if you're trying to text people and whatnot, and if you're trying to download applications, it's going to be fine, I'm sure. But if you wanted to play heavy intensive games, let's say Genshin Impact, let's say we were able to get on this phone, it would be so slow and it would be so boggy. And also because of the design of this phone, you just wouldn't really have that great of an experience with it because it's a square display. The games that you're going to play probably aren't optimized for these types of displays. It's not really going to be that great of an experience. So you're stuck in a situation where games and stuff may not even work. If you're able to install an APK file on this thing, it's probably not even going to be that great of an experience. So it's really not going to be probably the best bet for a lot of people out there. So that's kind of a sad thing. And on top of that, apparently the BlackBerry services were stopped last year. So it makes even less sense to buy something like this, in my opinion. So, and that kind of covers that up. The battery life on this thing, I heard when it first came out wasn't that bad, but now, I mean, the battery's degraded for it's almost a 10-year-old phone now, so it's not going to be that great. So, to kind of sum up this whole entire video, what I'd probably tell you is that I definitely do think a phone like the Blackberry Classic really isn't worth it at all anymore. I mean, if you're wanting to go through and use it as a collector's item or something, then maybe it has some value, but I don't even know who would be willing to buy a Blackberry Classic over a phone like a pristine condition like iPhone 6, for example. If you're able to get an iPhone 6 in box and a Blackberry Classic in box, the iPhone 6 is probably going to be worth money over the long term. With the Blackberry Classic, like I said, I think when it first came out, it was good and everything, but right now it really doesn't make any sense to go and buy a phone like this at all, in my opinion. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.